G'day everyone, and welcome to another edition of Chris Rankin's Music Crush. I'm doing a discography today, the discography of Onslaught. So they are my favourite thrash metal band of all time. I absolutely love this band very much. I've spoken a bit before, but I got a chance to meet them back in 2016 and hang out with them for the best part of about 48 hours. I got to drive them around Jakarta a little bit and show them some of the places in there, and just had a great long discussion with Cy Keeler. He's a big prog rock fan, 70s prog rock fan, so I had a great discussion with him on one of the nights. Big musical nerd discussion. Had a great chat with Nige. Really got to know them well, and I consider them pretty good friends now. This was the time when Mike Hurahan was the drummer, and then Ian GT was also part of the band. Jeff Williams, who was still there, he was in the band as well. And then of course Cy recently left, and Nige. So that was the lineup that I met. Yeah, great time. I even they invited me into there when they were having a couple of their meals backstage, and said, do you want to share some of this? And yeah, cool. So it was surreal. I've been a fan of this band since 1985. I got Power from Hell on cassette not long after it came out. And a band that, reasonably biggish, but not everyone knows about them. And I thought I'd probably never get to see them. Never ever got to see them. And then they were put on the lineup for the Hamasonic Festival in Jakarta, and I happened to be helping out backstage, doing a lot of stuff with all different bands, basically working backstage for the two main organisers and owners of Hamasonic Festival. And so when I saw them on the lineup, I thought, I don't believe this. I'm finally going to get to see this band I've waited over 30 years to see live. I'm finally going to get to see them. Not only did I get to see them live, but yeah, I got to hang out with them, talk to them. My very good friend Mike Ball, who grew up with them on the same street and was sort of a standby bassist for them as well back in the early days. He helped introduce me to them, and as I say, took lots of photos with them, got to chat with them. It was an incredibly surreal moment in time. So I'm going to show you their discography. I have all their studio albums, plus one other as well. And I'll show you in a minute when I get to those albums, but when I knew they were going to be on the lineup, and then I knew that I was going to be working backstage as well, my official title was band liaison, so I was making sure the bands were happy and well and knew where they were going and what to do and all that. So I got to meet quite a few bands. Suffocation I got to meet and hang out with. Internal Bleeding I got to meet and hang out with. So funny, both Suffocation and Internal Bleeding, just that great New York dry humour, just so good. But anyway, when I knew I was going to meet Onslaught and hang out with them and so forth, I took two CD booklets out of the CD jewel case and just took them up to Jakarta with me. And at the time I had pants with a few pockets and sort of quite good pockets, so I put just the CD booklets in my pockets, being a bit of an opportunist, just in case I got a chance for them to sign them, and they did. And then later on, Mike, on one of his recent returns back to England, probably about 3 years ago now, he got me the Force 30th Anniversary Edition CD signed by the boys as well. So I'll show you those when I get up to them. But that's my little story around Onslaught. I always loved Onslaught because, as you're probably aware, I love all genres of music. I love all genres of metal, but Onslaught just had that little bit more aggression and heaviness to them than a lot of the other thrash at the time. There's a song on Power from Hell called Death Metal, which, later on, death metal would become one of my favourite subgenres. So I've always loved this band. They started in 1982 from Bristol in England. So when most of the thrash, a lot of the thrash was coming out of the US and the Bay Area and so forth, and California. Onslaught along with Discharge were the sort of punky thrash coming out of England, and then of course a little bit later on Sabbath as well. But yeah, that's where they started. They started out, they were more of a hardcore punk band when they started out. Their early demos and so forth are very much hardcore punk, and I guess like a few thrash bands started off in that way and then moved into the heavy thrash. And they are heavy for a thrash band. They are very heavy. They certainly do. They never quite get into death metal, but they sort of touch the boundary, and they quite often just dip the big toe into the death metal genre. Size vocals are generally quite aggressive, harsh, a little bit more harsh than say Chuck Billy's of Testament. But yeah, anyway, let's get into I've been wanting to do this one for a little while, just haven't really had the time to do it. I've got quite a few discographies planned to show you, but I thought I'd do this one because, as I say, they are my favourite thrash band of all time and one of my all-time favourite bands. So here we go. Starting off with their debut, we have Power from Hell. This came out in 1985. I originally got this on cassette. And this is where my love affair for this band started. Brilliant album. Raw, very raw. You can still hear a little bit of the punky thrash sort of sound, if you know what I mean. But not overly raw. It's certainly not. Some debuts can sound, just not very good at all, but it's the start, so you're okay with this. This is still pretty good. Really good. I mean, the songs on here that I love. Power from Hell is brilliant. Sinister, nasty. Of course, you've got the song Death Metal, 1985. Now, I'm not saying it's a death metal song, but it's certainly an early mention of the phrase death metal. Lord of Evil, very, very nasty sounding song. Just really, really good. So yeah, Power from Hell, 1985. That's their debut. Next, a year after, and on the first album they had Paul Mahoney, or sometimes they called him Mo. They used to call him, his nickname was Mo for short. So he was the first vocalist on the first album. After that, they got a guy by the name of Cy Keeler, who most of you may know is the most long-time vocalist in the band. They've had others, but he's been the one that's been there for most of their time, and he was the guy I met and had the great long discussions with all the time about music. A really nice, down-to-earth guy. He's quite different to what you think when you see him on stage. His vocal style's aggressive and he's all into the thrash and all, but when you talk to him, he's like your old chilled out uncle sort of thing. He's just very cool, very nice guy. He'll be sitting there drinking a cup of tea and talking about English prog rock. So quite different to what you think, but a very nice down to earth fellow, really good. But anyway, he came into the band for their next album, The Force. A lot of people consider this their classic. Probably my second favourite album of theirs. Yeah, probably equal second, I'd say. Maybe second overall. This is the one that really started to get them going and started to get them noticed. The Force, this came out in 1986, so Cy Keeler comes on board. And this is a reasonably well-known album. It came out obviously in 1986, the year of thrash, as they say. Very heavy, very aggressive. Nige has always been a master, like I think any good sort of thrash band, but he has been a master of writing aggressive riffs, but that are hooky and melodic at the same time, that really pull you in and are memorable. The songs never all sound the same. You will sort of get the melody line of the songs stuck in your head in a good way. Some thrash, sometimes it tends to be all just the fast riffs, and it can become a little bit of a blur, but I find with Onslaught that never really happens. So this is The Force, 1986. Now this is one of the ones that I got signed. This is the one I got signed one of the ones I got signed myself. You can see there, that was when I was looking after them and hanging out with them backstage. A brilliant album. Let There Be Death, an amazing song, absolute classic song. Metal Forces with that really good hook riff in it. Demoniac, also great. Flame of the Antichrist, brilliant. I mean, there is no weak track on this album at all. Fight with the Beast, heavy, nasty. An absolutely brilliant album. Onslaught, The Force, probably the most brilliant and criminally unknown thrash metal album of the 80s, in my opinion. This is every bit as good as any thrash album that came out in 1986, and I don't say that lightly, but I think it is. It's just lesser known, but so good. Now this is the 30th anniversary of The Force, so this is the one that my good friend Mike Ball got signed for me when he went back to England a few years ago. I think it's pretty much, the original track listing is there, the original 7 songs, and then there's 4 bonus tracks. Yeah, I can see here 4 bonus tracks of live versions of the songs that are on here. So yeah, very cherished indeed, that. Now, this album, this is definitely the black sheep in their collection, and I don't say it's bad. I think there's some good songs on here. There really is. The main problem with this album is, in many ways, and even Nige. So Nige is the guy behind Onslaught. He is, every band sort of has that one guy that's the main guy behind the band. The songwriting, the driving force. He is the dude of Onslaught, and even he says that this is his least favourite album by a fair way. The main problem with this next album, and I'll show it, In Search of Sanity, the CD version, the cover's a little bit dark for some reason. I notice on a lot of the LP versions, the artwork is a lot brighter. It's meant to be like an Insanity sort of room, you know, with the padded walls and everything. And on the CD version, it's quite dark. So this album came out in 1989. So let me tell you about this album. So Psychealer goes, not by the band's choice. So what happened was The Force did pretty well, reasonably well. Next thing you know, they get signed to a bigger label. I think it was, I want to say London Records. No, I might be wrong. I saw it before. Yeah. No, maybe it was Candlelight. I don't know. I can't see it on here. Anyway, doesn't matter. But they got signed to a bigger label at the time, and the label gave them a lot of pressure to. Basically, Nige says that the label came in and did everything. It was not like they negotiated, can you do this? The label basically came in and said, look, you've signed to this. This is what you're going to do. They didn't like Psy's aggressive, harsh vocals. So they said, right, we want him to leave. They brought in Steve Grimmett of Grim Reaper, who is a more sort of singing style of a vocalist. A great voice, great singer, but it's pretty arguable that he doesn't fit the sound of Onslaught in any way. And you got to hear me out. I'm not saying I don't like this album in any way at all. It's still about an 8 or 8.5 out of 10 for me. But Steve Grimmett's vocals did not suit Onslaught. Nige says that later on. So much so that they've been planning for a while to re-record this. They were going to do it with Psy, and I don't think they did. I think they're now thinking about doing it with their new vocalist, because they want the traditional Onslaught sound with these songs. There's good songs on here, and the riffs are still good. There's definitely less aggression on this album. It's more of a straight-up heavy metal album, or more of the sort of a lighter thrash sound, if you know what I mean. And everything about this album was all completely driven by the label, and it sold well. but the label wanted them to sell 1 million copies in the US, and they didn't quite reach that. So, now, because of some of the things that happened in the making of this album and while this album was going on, it started to splinter the band. A little bit of other things. I mean, thrash was sort of dying anyway at that time, not long after this came out. So unfortunately, after this album in 1991, Onslaught disbanded. They just didn't feel right about this album, and a lot of things that happened because of this album and circumstances of time. But you've got some great songs on here. Shell Shock is a ripper. That's a really good thrash song. Lightning War is an absolute fantastic song. Welcome to Dying is a big 10-minute plus epic. It sounds like it's going to be a power ballad, but it's got a little bit like Metallica 1 in that way, that starts off sort of slow and epic, and then it gets heavier, and it's a good song. Of course, they do the cover of AC/DC's Let There Be Rock, which was an EP that they'd actually released before this, where the title track was the cover of AC/DC's Let There Be Rock. So it's a good album, but lots of problems came because of it, and it's one of those albums that, although it's good, a lot of people, including me at the time, felt very disenchanted by it because it was just completely different to anything else Onslaught had done in their traditional sound, and it's still by a long way the black sheep in their catalogue, because it doesn't sound like any other Onslaught album. And yeah, it was a little bit of the catalyst for them breaking up for 13 years. So around 2004, one of the members of the band, I think it was the drummer at the time, somehow found out that a record label had re-released their first two albums, Power from Hell and The Force, without Onslaught even knowing, and they'd re-released them, and they'd sold really, really well. So Nige says when they contacted that label, the label was really good about it. They said, "Yep, right, here's all the royalties. Sorry about that," and they gave them everything that they'd rightly to receive from it. But it got Nige and the other members at the time. Cy was, back talking with Nige. It was never really bad. It all was good and well. And it got them thinking that, hey, if these old albums sold really well, and metal at that stage, obviously in the early 2000s, was mainstream metal anyway, was starting to make a big comeback. I never believed metal went away in the 90s. I thought some of the best albums in metal history and best bands started in the 90s. But anyway, I digress. So with that, they thought, hey, let's get this going again. We've got a real chance. So they did a bit of touring and realised that people were really loving them. So they said, let's go and make a new album. And they came out with this absolute monster. My all-time favourite thrash metal album. Pretty clearly too. And I once again, I don't say that lightly. This is just everything I love about this album. This is a perfect 10 out of 10 for me. Just incredible. So this came out in 2007. And as you can see, this is another one that was signed. I got this signed at the time when I met them and hung out with them. Killing Peace, 2007. Some of my favourite thrash metal songs of all time are on here. Burn and Killing Peace are just absolute dead set brilliant. They're just perfect. Pain, brilliant. Prayer for the Dead, brilliant. Tested to Destruction, brilliant. Planting Seeds of Hate is sort of a mid-tempo groover, and then Shock and Awe to finish up. And of course, look who the producer is, the wonderful Andy Sneap. So that had a little bit to do with it as well. I mean, Andy Sneap was in everything at that time in metal albums, and has always been such a great producer. It's got his sound on it, it's full and it's rich and lush and heavy and aggressive. Size back in the band, well and truly. Everyone was absolutely well and truly on point for this album. I can't rate this highly enough. I absolutely adore this album very much. Onslaught, Killing Peace, that was their fourth album, 2007. Then 2008, they put out this, and not many people really know about this album or have had it. It's called Shadow of Death. The Shadow of Death, sorry. I always forget if there's a the or that in front of some titles. Shadow of Death. It's a compilation. It's got one of those weird covers on the front. And then there's the jewel case. It's basically the same. And what this is a compilation of all the early hardcore punk demos. So it's really cool. It's pretty raw. It's pretty untouched, if you know what I mean. And but it's good. It shows a good history of where they came from and where they started. And I was pretty pleased to pick this up. I found this by accident in the wild somewhere, and instantly I went, well, I didn't think that this was an album, so I bought it. Not really. Obviously, the internet was, kind of going, but not as easy to look at then. You didn't have it on your smartphone and such. So when I saw it, I thought, oh, I didn't know this album existed. And when I got it back and looked it up, I realised that that's what it was, as a compilation, not a studio album. And but yeah, it's a good album. Good album. Quite different, really different, but it's just a good album to hear their history and their sound and where they came from. Next, 2011, we have Sounds of Violence. Great album, very heavy. Andy Rosser on this one, a guitarist, their lead guitarist that I had for a little while. Very good guitarist. Brilliant album, very heavy. This is probably up there. I would put this third after The Force. I was almost going to say that it's equal second with The Force, and then when I thought about it live, I thought, no, I still like The Force just a bit more. But this is a ripper. Absolutely brilliant. You've got Born for War. The Sound of Violence is brilliant. You've got Code Black. Rest in Peace's Hate Box. Just a brilliant album. Very heavy thrash. So good, so well written, so many hooks in this. And they do a cover of Motorhead's Bomber as well, which is a bonus track. But yeah, 2011, that's their fifth studio album. Love it to bits, absolutely love it to bits. Then 2013, now this is the album that when I saw them tour, they were still touring this album, so there was a fair bit they played off this live, a lot of the promotion. The shirt that I'm wearing now was part of that. This came out in 2013 and the album's called Six. Some people call it 666. The official title is Six, but you can see there in Roman numerals 666. Very modern sounding album. Still very much them, but very heavy. Very heavy sounding album indeed, and probably their most modern sound. So even their new albums, it still goes back to the old school thrash sound, whereas this one is probably the most slickest and most modern metal sounding. Very, very heavy indeed, and Psy's vocals really, wow, they're really full on this. A little bit of an experimentation, but in a good way. Like, my favourite song on this album, and one of my favourite Onslaught songs, is Children of the Sand, which has a very Egyptian sound to it. The riffs and the whole sound of that song sounds like Egypt. Really, really good, amazing hook in it, and it's got this lovely woman's ethereal sort of voice chanting over the top, which makes it sound eerie but nice at the same time. Of course, you got the classic song 666 on here, which is just an absolute bruiser. Crucifixion, which got some decent play, like you heard it on a lot of internet metal stations and all. There was a lyric video for it. There was a lyric video for 666 as well, I think, from memory. But just a great album. So good. And I know a lot of younger metal fans, this is the one that kind of got them into Onslaught as well. People that had never heard Onslaught before, with the power of internet and YouTube and so forth, this started to reach a lot more people that had never heard of Onslaught before. And this is the album, as I say, that I saw them on when they were touring. So quite a dear album to me in that way as well. Great album. And then, unfortunately, last year, I'm pretty sure it was at the start of last year, or maybe even the end of 2019, I'm not sure of the exact time, but they'd done a lot of touring, and they'd been to places. They went to China, they went all through Eastern Europe, they did a lot of out-of-the-way places and touring. Of course, they went to Indonesia, where I saw them. They've never been to Australia, still never been to Australia, so that was the other reason. It was great to see them there. But Cy just sort of let them know that, with no hard feelings at all and all the best wishes, but he just had enough of touring and being on the road all the time, and so he thought he'd do the right thing, I guess. Probably shouldn't speak for him, but I guess that was probably his thinking. He said, look, I'm just not into doing all the big long tours internationally anymore. And they said, yeah, fine. So they thought, rather him record the next album, it would be the good timing to get someone new in to record the new album. Now, Dave Garnett, a couple of times on tour, had stepped in for Cy when he couldn't go live on stage or couldn't be there for a performance. Dave Garnett had stepped in and done a couple of guest vocal performances for him on tour, so they thought that he would be the rightful pick. His voice is very similar to Cy's as well, so it wouldn't go back to the Grimmett days. And so Dave Garnett came in and replaced Cy Keeler, and last year they put out this fantastic album, Generation Antichrist. This finished very high up on my top 100 albums of last year. This was my favourite thrash album of last year. Brilliant album. Very much like their classic thrash sound. Sounds new and polished, but it's still very old school thrash sounding. Great album. This came out, as I say, last year, 2020. I think it was August or September from memory. I know they did release some lyrical videos before that, but because of all sorts of things, obviously last year the actual release of the album came out a bit later. Great songs on here. You've got Strike Fast, Strike Hard, Bow Down to the Clowns, with really good music video with lots of evil clowns on the music video. I love it. Generation Antichrist, Empire's Fall, just really, really great, memorable thrash songs on here, and a fantastic album. Came in the digipack, which sort of folds out like that. So yeah, that's their 7th studio album, and that's I say that's all Onslaught studio albums. I don't have any of the EPs or demos, but I do have the Shadow of Death, which it's a compilation and includes all their early demos. So I don't know if I ever saw any EPs or demos in the wild, I might get them. But I am a completionist on my favourite bands as far as studio albums, but I'm not a completionist that I have to have everything they've done. Having the studio albums is usually enough for me. If the other things turn up, if I see them, I'll grab them, but as long as I have all the studio albums, I'm fine. So that's the Onslaught discography. If you've never heard of them, or you've only heard of one song or one album, please delve into them and dig into them a bit better. Let me just go through them quick. So you've got Onslaught, Generation Antichrist. Before that, you've got Onslaught 6. Then before that, Sounds of Violence, 2011. The Shadow of Death, which is the demo comp. 2007, my favourite Onslaught album, my favourite thrash album of all time, Killing Peace, amazing album. Before that, long before that, back in 1989, In Search of Sanity, which was their 3rd album. Before that, you've got The Force, 1986, their 2nd album, and before that, their debut, Power from Hell, 1985. So look, I hope you enjoyed that. I really do, and as I say, hope you maybe find something there you didn't know about. I will be doing some more. I've said it a few times. I've got about 5 or 6, 7 discography videos planned. It's just a matter of time to film them and set them up. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you soon.